When I watched Boye Mafe, the edge rusher out of Minnesota, I came away with one thought. If he fixed this one thing, he could be a really good pass rusher. He would be more consistent, he would penetrate easier into the backfield, and he could use his 4.5 speed to attack the quarterback on any given snap. This one thing is how he starts each play. Before we begin the breakdown, if you can do me a huge favor and like and subscribe to my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. So anyways, in my last video on this channel, I interviewed Coach Ed. For those that don't know, Coach Ed is a pass rush specialist who has trained a number of defensive linemen in the NFL. The reason why I bring him up is that he was also Boye Mafe's pass rush coach as well. My interview with him lasted roughly 23 minutes. In that video, we talked about Mafe, his skill set, and his general thoughts as a trained professional. Now in this video, we're going to use that knowledge combined with his tape to talk holistically about what Mafe brings to the Seahawks. For me, it all comes down to his pass rush upside. Starting with his advanced stats, Mafe's pressure rate last season was over 16%. The average was under 10%, so this is very good. Compare that to the top edge rushers in this class. Guys like Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson were both in the 17 to 18% range. Mafe, who was at 16%, obviously had a good year. Now, when it comes to his pass rush, my main takeaway and the major thing I want you to get from this video is how Mafe approaches his pass rushing moves. The difference between his upside as a pass rusher when he smoothly takes off the line of scrimmage as opposed to when he false steps to begin a play is absolutely astounding. When he false stepped, I don't think I saw a single pressure from him. However, when he cleanly exploded off the line of scrimmage without that false step, Mafe was incredible. He was able to bring speed, flexibility, and a deadly chop move to the position. Simply put, he was so much better when he didn't make that initial error. Now, for those that don't know what I mean by false steps, what would happen is that Mafe would be squared to the line of scrimmage, he would then step backwards before moving forwards after the snap. What you would see on film is that Mafe would be a half a second behind the rest of his defensive line. Granted, Mafe had 4.5 speed so he could make up for it, and he was really good at landing some of his chops last season. But the NFL is a different game. If he doesn't clean this up, he's going to have a really hard time. This false step issue that I just brought up was something that I asked Coach Ed about during my interview. This was also something that Coach Ed and Boye Mafe worked on over the offseason. Mafe realizes it's a problem and he's working to fix it. This tells me two things. It tells me that Mafe has self-awareness, and this also gives me the hope that he'll be able to take on future blockers. Speaking of that chop move, this was Mafe's favorite move by far. He would stab with his inside hand, he would chop down with his outside hand, and then he would finish the rush by ripping or swimming over the top of the blocker. This is how he created a large number of his pressures. This move was deadly last year. Offensive line would get thrown out of the way due to this move. They would lose their balance, and his chop move would clear their hands from Mafe's frame, allowing him to get in the backfield. Take this rush against West Virginia. This happened in the first quarter. Mafe engaged with both hands, he then cleared his frame using that outside arm, then he finished the move with the swim that we just talked about. This helped him beat the offensive lineman, and he almost collected his safety here. The thing about Mafe that I really like is that he has a phenomenal skill set. His first step explosion will scare offensive linemen backwards, and his flexibility to corner and flatten the edge will allow him to collect sacks. There were plays where he was able to beat the offensive lineman so quickly that I saw him flattened at 8 yards into the pocket. This is extremely impressive because you have to have the hip and ankle flexibility in order to do this. As I was reading other scouting reports, they claimed that his flexibility and his ankles were only just okay. The reason why I think they said this was because how his hands and feet weren't always connected. He didn't always do a good job of landing his hands. When he missed, Mafe would get blown around the pocket. At that point, he was taken completely out of the play and he didn't make an impact on the quarterback. To me, this isn't a lack of flexibility or anything like that. He flashed the hip and ankle bend to truly turn in the pocket. However, once he gets better at using his hands and connecting them to his feet, he'll do a much better job in the future. Speaking of other improvements, we already talked about his issues with false steps and when his hands and feet weren't connected. The other thing I noticed while going through his film was something that Coach Ed and I talked about during our interview. At this point in his pass rushing development, Mafe doesn't have any counters or any secondary moves built off his main rush. For example, he's amazing at that stab, chop, and rip or using that swim that we talked about earlier. But what would happen is that offensive tackles started sitting deeper and deeper in their pass protection, expecting him to use that move. They defended him knowing that he was trying to get into the pocket from the outside. This actually opened them up to inside moves, but Mafe never took advantage of them. He never used that stab, chop, and rip to set up any inside moves. There were multiple plays where the B-gap was begging to get hit by a rush inside. Mafe never took advantage of this. Learning a secondary move to his main rush will instantly make him more dangerous. Imagine if he had a spin or a double chop rush to get inside just like we see from Aiden Hutchinson. Hutchinson feasted last year on his double chop rip move inside, and that's how he got many of his sacks. His outside speed to power bull rush set that move up. What I want to see from Mafe is for him to use that stab, chop, and rip move to set up an inside rush. If he does this, offensive tackles won't be able to overset outside. Moving on, and as a run defender, Mafe primarily played on the edge as the force player for Minnesota's defense. His goal was to keep running backs inside while maintaining leverage on the offensive tackle or tight end he was facing. In one-on-one duties, Mafe was just okay. I felt like his anchor was just average, and anytime he faced any sort of double team at the point of attack, he was immediately bullied backwards. Also, anytime the offense showed any sort of zone read option or any sort of trickery in the backfield, I felt like his identification of that play was hit or miss. He doesn't have a ton of pop with his hands, and his length is below average. On first and second downs, at this point in his career, he's going to be a bit of a liability. Yes, he can take on a tight end with power, but his main ability, and the reason why he was a second-round prospect to start with, it all comes from his pass rushing ability. Just like Coach Ed and I talked about, the Seahawks should line him up as a wide nine technique attacking the quarterback with full force. I want him to be a situational pass rusher for his rookie season, and that's pretty much it. I would avoid using him as a run defender at the moment. Not only that, but the effect of a potential run also slowed down his ability to rush the passer. His moves on play action were very telling. He would get caught in the should I defend the run or should I disengage with the quarterback type of mindset. This would really slow him down. If I was the Seahawks defensive coordinator, I would use him in clear and obvious pass rushing situations to start his career. I would focus on him eliminating the false steps, which is doable, and then have him get better at learning to identify run versus pass later on. This will remove any weaknesses he has with zone read options as well. The final thing I have to say about Mafe is that he was occasionally dropped into pass coverage. He did this on roughly 40 of his snaps last season. I was actually impressed with how he moved in space. He could cover running backs out of the backfield on wheel routes, and he even helped as a trail defender on seams. Against NFL tight ends and running backs, I can see this skill set being used as a change-up to his abilities. I would occasionally drop into coverage if the Seahawks want to run a fire zone blitz or something like that, especially on third downs. Now for Mafe's pro comparison. The player I keep coming back to is Bud Dupree of the Tennessee Titans. Both are roughly the same size at 6'4", weighing in the 260s. Both had the same arm length at 32 and 5/8 inches, and both ran in the 4.5s in the 40-yard dash. I think Bud Dupree was the better prospect coming out, but Mafe has the upside to be a 10+ sack player. Regardless, there's a lot to like about Mafe. Remember, you can still like him in his upside, while definitely understanding that he still has a lot of things to work on. The good news is that the Seahawks defensive coordinator is now Clint Hurtt. He's an energetic guy that always seems to do a good job of maximizing his defensive line skill sets. So if there's one coach that I think can fix Mafe's issues, Hurtt is probably that guy. That makes me like his fit and usage even more. Outside of Mafe, the Seahawks had a really good draft overall. I actually broke down both Cross and Walker on this channel, so make sure you check those videos out. I love the Cross pick. He's an instant starter at left tackle, and he's a perfect fit for the Seahawks zone blocking scheme. Walker is also a really good player. He'll be a great fit in the Seahawks zone running game, even though there is some controversy on the draft capital used to take him. No matter how you feel about that though, Walker was my favorite running back in this class, and he'll definitely be a good weapon in this offense. Going back to Mafe though, he's the type of player where a bit of projection has to be made. You have to think about what he could look like in 2 or 3 seasons. At this point in his career, he's going to be more of a designated pass rusher, and that's completely fine. The good news is that the Seahawks have Darrell Taylor and Uchenna Nwosu who will take starting snaps in this defense. Let him learn behind them, and I think over time, Mafe has the upside to turn into a really good player. Well, that's all I have for you in this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Again, make sure you check out my interview with Coach Ed, as he had so much insight to offer in terms of Boye Mafe's skill set. In my next video, I'll keep looking at how various players fit their draft schemes. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and keep a lookout for those. As always, if you want to support me directly via my Patreon account, use the link below. You can also follow me on Twitter at Samuel R. Gold.